Good. So we're going to carry on. From this morning, anybody have a sort of particular point that struck them and was especially meaningful or relevant or insightful or helpful? It's a dangerous question, isn't it? Because if nobody had anything, oh dear. Anyhow, I hope that's very important. I mean, you can't catch, there's so much information, you can't catch it all. Anyhow, I try to recap what I think is the sort of the main point. Oh yeah, good, great. So that we're going into another part now, but just to recap. So this is a sort of summary, isn't it, in a way, of what we talked about before. And if you remember, the explanation was, it's not so we improve our theological understanding just for its own sake that we meet together. In the end, to sort everything out, we need to understand God better and have a closer relationship with God. And the insight the principle gives, its particular contribution, is to explain the nature of God by looking at the nature of everything that's created and finding out that in everything that's created there's an internal character and an external form. And this is the most fundamental, common nature of everything in the creation. So whilst we see the external form of everything, we have to understand that that external form is the way it is because of an invisible cause, which is the internal character. And at the very core of that internal character is something that's rooted ultimately in the purpose of love, if you like, the origin of which is heart. So that's the case in everything in the creation, and particularly it's the case in terms of human life. So if human life has no connection to the heart, no connection to love, then actually it lacks value and it doesn't bring us joy, it doesn't bring us fulfillment. But anything, even the most simple task, even a dirty task, even an unpleasant task, even a painful task, even a task that requires of you sacrifice or pain or difficulty, if it's actually an expression of your profound love for God, for other people, your commitment to ideals, something high and true, it's worthy to do. So sometimes in previous occasions I showed a little slide of a lady who's a sort of example of this. There's lots of examples amongst history's heroes, but I showed a slide of this lady who's leading the democracy movement in Burma, or Myanmar as it's called, Aung San Suu Kyi. And she's an extraordinary lady. She's now probably heading for 70, I suppose. But she's from Burma. Her father was the person who was involved in getting the independence of Burma from British colonial rule. He died. He was actually assassinated very shortly after the Second World War, as he was in the process of finding independence. His wife was a diplomat. His daughter grew up, having lost her dad, in India with her mum, and had a very particular experience with that. But she ended up studying in Britain, marrying an Englishman, an English professor, and having a couple of children, going back to Burma because her mother wasn't very well, and then finding herself at the centre of the whole democracy movement in Burma must have been the 80s. And somehow there was an election, her party won the election, and then the military regime prevented it from come into being and retook control of the country. And then a whole process occurred where she was separated from her husband. Her husband was in England, the children were in England, and then her husband contracted cancer. And there was a big dilemma because basically the strategy of the Burmese military government was, your husband can't come to you, so you have to go to your husband. Of course, if she goes to her husband, she'll never go back to Burma. They never let her in. So it was a matter of, do I go to my husband and my children, or do I stay in Burma? If I go to my husband and my children, which is obviously in one level what your heart calls you to do you understand? Naturally. What does it mean? It means I have abandoned my people. I've abandoned my nation. I've abandoned their freedom. What shall I do? It's a difficult one, isn't it? It's not a simple one. And actually, she didn't see her husband for a long time, and he died. A number of years, they didn't see each other, and he died. But if you hear her speak and know, but she doesn't have any regret. Of course, I'm sure it's personally very painful, but she doesn't have any regret because she knows she did the right thing, and she's profoundly respected by other people. So, following your true heart is not a simple issue. Do you understand? This is a very important thing to identify. What is, because the idea in the end is if that's descriptive of the nature of God, then we already said God makes things after his own nature, right? So everything in the creation has the same form as God, the same external form, the same internal character. But most things in the creation are a symbol. Do you understand what I mean by a symbol? It's got the same sort of shape, but it doesn't really have the same contents. Do you know what I mean? Even we say a symbol, it's like a flag. An image is like a map of a nation. Do you understand? The flag of a nation symbolizes something, but a map can have all sorts of much, much, much more detail about what the nation really is. So human beings are not a symbol of God. They're made in the image of God. Why did God make human beings in his image? Because God is a relational God, wants to have a partner. If you want to have a partner, what would you rather have, a pet dog or a pet worm? What would you rather have? You want a being that resembles you. The more closely the being resembles you, the more you can give. The more you can give, the more potential there is for joy. So God needs by his very nature, a partner to whom God can give everything, and who can receive all that's being given and respond. And then God, who is complete within his own being, but is a relational being, can become more, in a sense, through the relationship. How do we know it's like that? Is this just some wild, crazy theological statement which has no ground in reality? We know it's like that because we're like that. Do you understand? Well, you could say if God made us to have a relationship with us, then God has a relationship with us and God has a relationship with Isabel, and that's it. Finish. God's got a partner and that's finish. But it doesn't finish. It doesn't finish. God has a relationship with you, but then what's the next thing? Does it finish there? Is God satisfied? Yeah, but basically, God, you have a nature which isn't satisfied. It's not complete to relate to God. In fact, you're made to relate to somebody else, to relate to nature, to relate to everything else. So when you put someone in solitary confinement, why is it a punishment? Somebody said, David made the joke, after this week, you might like to go to the retreat where you don't speak for a week. But fundamentally, if you put someone in solitary confinement, what happens to them what happens to a lot of people after a period of time? They go mad. What happens to people if you put them in a circumstance of sensory deprivation? Do you know sensory deprivation? It means you're in the dark, you're nothing to touch, nothing to hear, nothing to see. You go crazy. You go mad. Because you can't relate. So we're relational beings. Relationships aren't easy. Maybe they're easier with the worm or the dog than they are with people sometimes because we have a difficulty. That difficulty is that our internal character is influenced such that we have a contradiction in there. We have one mind which heads in the good direction, another mind which heads in the wrong direction. And this is to do with the state of the heart. Basically, things which are motivated for the sake of something high and true, which is true to the best part of me, and which is true to other people. That's my original nature. But we have another nature which is very practiced and very developed, which means that we have desires within us which are not true. They're not for other people, and they're not for, not for higher principles. Just they're for me. And sometimes it's very poor, really poor. We really did it because I wanted to do it. I don't give a damn about my wife, my children, my country, my colleagues, my friends, people who are weaker and less fortunate than myself. I just want to please me. It's very miserable. So, but God isn't like that. So why do we make this claim? We make this claim, and the evidence is, who do we admire? You know, do we admire Idi Amin, or do we admire, you know, who do we admire? Or do we admire Aung San Suu Kyi? Who do we admire? Who's a role model worth having? You know, who does history recognize? You know, we know what's impressively, deeply impressively love. You know, it manifests substantiated love. And we respect those people. It happens in our school, it happens with our teachers, you know. Which teacher do you admire? The one who never prepared the lesson? The one who never invested anything? The one who just, you know, shouts at people and puts them down and makes them feel miserable and small and useless? Or the one who puts in everything and lifts people up and changes their lives? You know, so that's the evidence in a sense. Can you accept? You don't have to accept, but can you see the rationale behind it? So what we are, what's truest and best in human nature, where's this coming from? Because it's not confined to what, you know, it's only white people who are like that, you know, only white people are good, black people, no. Oh, it's only black people like that, it's only yellow people, oh, Orientals, yes, you know. I'm an Oriental, Oriental's good, everybody else, very inferior culture, you know. Christians, oh yes, they're going to heaven. Muslims, well, of course not. You know, what a load of nonsense. What a load of absolute evident nonsense when you meet and know people. It is not like that. You find unbelievably outstanding people of all races, of all nations. But they have a quality in common, which goes much deeper than skin color, cultural difference, religious background. It's much deeper, much more profound. So that's reality. How's that possible? Because they all come from the same origin. That's why when you get to the essence of every religious truth, the core, most essential truths are the same. And they all elevate human beings to put highest principles first and put other people ahead of myself. And if they're practiced, they make a better world. So this is the point, do you see? So, and this is the claim of the principle. The evidence is in what's best of us, what's best of human beings, and in the whole natural world. So someone asked the question about energy. What do we mean by energy, right? So I don't know if I can give you a 100% answer. Certainly it won't be overly scientific in its nature because I'm not a scientist. Someone who was might do it better than me. But let me take it from the point of view of the principle, which is not, it shouldn't be against the scientific viewpoint, absolutely not. It should be able to connect to that viewpoint. But essentially what the principle says is God, the origin, the original cause, is of course not limited by time and space. In other words, God is beyond the realm of time and space. God is the eternal God, transcendent of time and space. And also, of course, God is not dependent on anything else for God's own existence, because God exists and then from God everything else comes into existence. So God is a self-existent God, not dependent on something else. And God is absolute in the sense of, you know, unchanging, the unchanging, absolute God. And the principle just takes a quotation. I'm sure there are quotations in other scriptures. I don't think I've got so many here. But anyhow, God said, I am who I am. This is, Moses asked God, what shall we call you, God? And God said, I am who I am. It's this sense of absolute self-existent eternal God. So the principle says, therefore, the energy within God, right? Remember, heart, internal character, emotion, intellect, will, concepts, laws, and then the next layer around, that's the external form. Now you don't see that either. That's not energy you see, but in terms of the nature of God, that's the outer circle. Do you understand? But why is that energy of God the way it is? That energy is not just energy, random, purposeless energy. No, that energy is guided purposefully by the heart and towards a plan, towards a purpose. So that energy, that universal prime energy within God, which maintains God's own existence, that is also eternal, self-existing and absolute. That's the claim of the principle. But also that energy within God comes from God into the created world and becomes the energy which causes all the energy in the created world. So that's what we're going to examine next. So universal prime energy, that's the terminology the principle used. This is the energy of God. It's within God and maintains God's own self-existence, but then it comes from God, the Creator God, into the creation. And it provides the origin of all the energies and forces that allow created beings to exist. Because there's this, the claim of the principles, there's this one sole ultimate origin of everything. So it's the sole ultimate origin of all energy. Through the agency of universal prime energy, the subject and object elements of every entity form a common base and enter into interaction. Now that's a very uplifting statement, isn't it? Just keep saying that to yourself all the time and you'll feel uplifted, won't you? Through the agency of universal prime energy, the subject and object elements of every entity form a common base and enter into interaction. Well, it's not so poetic, is it? It sounds very technical. But what does it really mean? It means because of the love of God, which, planned in God's mind's eyes, something amazingly beautiful, which God invested all his energy into, then God created something so extraordinarily beautiful. But in his beautiful creation, the beauty manifests through interaction. So that's what it means. Through the agency of universal prime energy, the subject and object elements. Everything in the created world is not made to exist by itself. Everything is made to exist for something else. And then through this interaction, it's very beautiful. So in nature, it's not conscious so much, if you like. It's sort of automatic, but it's unbelievably beautiful. When you see this extraordinary harmony in the natural world, it's very, very beautiful. It's love. It's living for the sake of each other. But of course, in the human case, there's an added dimension. This added dimension is we make conscious decisions about what we do. It's not automatic, and we're going to get into that as well more later. So, okay, diagrammatically, this is trying to explain it. So, we already talked about the fact that everything that exists has an internal character and an external form which are in a subject-object relationship, or a masculine aspect and a feminine aspect, and they interact with one another and then unite and become one, or a positive aspect and a negative aspect. Not meaning good and bad, it means two complementary aspects which are destined to unite with one another. So the concept in the principle is God designed it so. Why did God design it so? Because God designed as the artist, as the creator, after his own nature. And within God there's you remember this diagram? There's the internal character and the external form. There's the masculinity and the femininity. And they're harmonized as subject and object, centering on what? Centering on the heart, right? The heart harmonizes them for the purpose of love, and they generate the energy for God's own existence, if you like, on one angle. They also generate ideas, and they from the heart springs, the heart influences the emotion, intellect, and will. That creates the plans and the concepts. That creates the principles. And using that, out of that purpose, manifesting those principles, God's energy comes into the creation and creates a world which is made after the pattern of God's own being. Because the artist creates the art that resembles the artist. You understand? So God creates a world that resembles God. So in the world that God created, everything is interconnected in this same way: internal character, external form, masculinity, femininity. So nothing exists by itself. So then this universal prime energy coming from God, which carries this purpose element and is generated through the give and take action within God, this comes to everything that exists because, God made it. This energy comes, and then within this being, there's actually a subject part and an object part having give and take action. So, for example, say this is a man. Man has a mind and a body. They're having give and take action. Okay. I mean, there are many other constituent parts, and say this is a woman. Woman has a mind and a body. They're having give and take action, but actually also masculine and feminine, made to connect to one another. So, what happens next? So, the universal prime energy, it says, moves the subject and object partners to form a common base for their mutual relationship. encourages unity to create something greater. So let's explore that a bit more. So what it means is they then have a relationship with one another. Why do they have a relationship with one another? Because they're made to have a relationship with one another, and they're given a nature to seek each other in order to have that relationship. But that relationship, this one here, the energy that's created through their interaction with one another, that is a more visible energy that we see around us in the whole of the natural world. But that energy there is not causative energy. It's actually caused energy. What's causing it? Hopefully there's another one. Yes, there we go. That's universal prime energy, right? Which not only comes to each individual being, but also is the causative energy which makes them interact with one another. So, of course, you're following me, aren't you? What does it mean? It means God's a God of love, right? God's a God of heart. And then God has within his own being this interaction going on, but it's all for the purpose of love. And God, has as it were a mind or an internal character which is directing God's energy for the purpose of love. And God has, the masculine, the feminine, the negative, positive and the negative interacting with him. But when God creates, then God creates separate beings which are made for the sake of each other. So let's see if we can... there's a little bit more, and then there's a couple of examples which will make it more concrete. So the point is then, this is not blind energy. This is not just aimless energy. This is energy with a very specific purpose. Ultimately, the purpose resides here. It's the purpose of God's heart. It's that God is seeking a partner. And even more profoundly, when Father Moon explains this in a most profound way, he says, within God, there's so much beauty. It's amazing. Within God, God is not this bit and that bit that fight each other. God has different aspects, but they're absolutely, totally harmonized with one another. Absolutely, God is one. God is one. That's the nature of God, and there's so much beauty within God. And he explains, whatever you find in the world that's beautiful, it must have come from God. So it means that beauty resided in God invisibly. And when it came into the creation, it became visible. It became tangible. So even the principle explains, right, if you're a composer, right, and in your mind you catch a beautiful musical refrain, right? So you just keep it in your mind, right, and it whirls around your mind all the time, and that's it, finished. Is that the way it goes? No, it's in your mind, and then it's coming out of your mouth or into the piano or the guitar. And then once it's got there, where does it go next? Where do you want it to get to next? To the ears. You want to get it to someone else's ears. Why? And then from their ears, where does it go? Hopefully it gets into their... Yeah, and it touches them. That's the music is not meant... it's meant in the end to, get into the soul. From your soul to the other person's soul. Do you understand? Through the medium of music. So it's not sufficient it stays in your head, right? It's going to go from there into, something you sing, hum, write on a sheet of paper as music. Or that's the way it's going to go. So, from the heart of God comes this energy. This energy made this one and made that one. Why did it make this one and that one? So that they could manifest love, the harmony within God through their interaction. And then when God sees it, what is invisibly within God, God can see it and taste it outside of himself. So how do you know who you are? How do you know the result of your life? Where do you discover it? You find it out from other people and what you make. What you make in the world, that's what you discover. And then you feel proud. Then you feel accomplishment. You have things within you that could make something. And if you find the right way to channel it into your life and the right relationships and interactions, you can end up with something that, other people will testify to. Other people will applaud you for. Other people will recognize. And then your goodness comes, or even puts it another, even more substantial way. You love your wife loves you, husband loves you, and then, hey, what's What's going to manifest it? What's going to substantiate your love, do you think? The garden, the house, the internal decor. You know, that whether you have the sports car on the drive or not. I mean, these are expressions. They're not expressions, but ultimately, most precious expression is, of course, your children. So, you know, that's the way it works. When you create something which manifests this invisible internal quality in a substantial form, you have a lot more satisfaction. That's why the artist isn't sufficient to have a great work of literature in my head. I'm reading, you know, whatever the great work of literature is, you know, I'm reading it in my own head every day, and isn't it exciting? That's the end of it, satisfied. No, you want to put it into print. You want to get it out in the world. You want it to become the movie. You want it, you know, this type of thing. So anyhow, then what's invisibly within God is manifested here. So Father Moon expresses, God has within him the amazingly beautiful love that is between a parent and a child. God has it within his own being. But it's mixed up with everything else, and God can't taste it. But when he sees it in the love between a parent and a child, when he sees it in this thing I studied in social work about the mother suckling the child, yeah, and caring for its every need, and some extraordinary, amazing harmony taking place between them, that is just unbelievably beautiful to God. And God finds his own nature manifested. And every mother and child are the same, of course. Do you think? Yeah. No, the fundamental is something similar, but also each and every one is unique. So I don't know what it's like training, educating people about breastfeeding, but I'm sure, you know, there's no two mothers and babies that are exactly the same, you know, even in that external way, but also, you know, there's something special. And then you fed this child, and then you have another one, so it's going to be the same, isn't it? No, it's the same, but it's not the same. Because within God there's all this, you know, and every time it manifests, it's unique, but God can taste what resides within him that he couldn't taste unless it came into substance. So this nature of God is also the nature of ourselves as creators. It's the same nature. So, you know, this interaction between the bee and the flower, you know, whatever it is, we see it in the world, but this doesn't happen by accident. This happens by design. And where's the design coming from? It's coming from here. If it didn't come from there, it wouldn't work. So here we go, a couple of examples. First of all, a very practical, physical example in terms of human creation. So what's that? It's the key and the lock, right? So this, you know, keys and locks is quite a sophisticated partnership, isn't it, in terms of human creation? Because every key should be unique. I mean, you know, if it wasn't, it's a problem. So when I was a young man and you bought a Ford car, it was quite possible that 1 in 20 keys would fit not only your car, but someone else's as well. So if you try your Ford car key in as many locks as you can, you're likely to be able to open another car too, because they're not different enough. You know, that's not very good. Okay, but ideally, one key should open only one lock. They're absolutely created for the sake of each other. Now, of course, that is a total accident, isn't it? The people who make the keys, they never speak to the people who make the locks. What they do is they make a lot of locks and a lot of keys, and they just try them all out until they find one that fits. That's the way it works, isn't it? No, it's not the way it works. Completely ridiculous. It could never be like that. They're designed for the sake of one another. Do you understand? So, of course, you know, when you think of the natural world and you think of the bee and the flower, of course there's a process in nature whereby things adapt themselves to have to do with each other. So you get amazingly, refined insects and birds and you know, that relate to particular flowers, and they have long tongues or they have special things. So incredible. So, of course, there's a process within the interaction of nature that takes a part in that, but fundamentally behind it is the nature of God. And God creates everything to have to do with something else. So creation exists, things are created to exist through reciprocal relationships. So where's that invisible universal prime energy? It's because it's out of the nature and the love of God that everything came to be the way it is. That means everything's seeking for something else. And fundamentally, when it's working correctly, the relationships are mutually beneficial. They're not destructive, they're mutually beneficial. Even when you think of one animal, for example, that preys on another and eats it, well, that's not very beneficial, is it, for the one that's being eaten? But actually, in terms of the balance of the whole of nature, if you say, well, those terrible foxes who eat the rabbits, let's kill all the foxes, what happens to the rabbits? Big problem for the rabbits, because you upset the balance of nature. So actually there is a balance. So how is it like? It's an expression of the nature of God manifested in the creation. It's amazing, extraordinarily beautiful. So for give and take action to occur, it requires a partnership designed for the sake of each other. So the subject designed for the sake of the object, and the object designed for the sake of the subject. What does the subject do? The subject initiates the relationship and gives first. What does the object do? It receives what's being given and then it responds. And then through that, give and take occurs. And when give and take occurs, it creates energy. It creates the energy which enables things to develop and grow, enables things to reproduce and so on. So you need a subject partner and you need an object partner, and they're connected. How are they connected? Because they're coming from a common origin. There lies behind them a common principle and a common ultimate source of purpose or love. So nothing is created by accident is the claim of the principle. Everything is created as an act of love. It's created as an act of love. And very profoundly, the principle explains, of all the things of creation, human beings are particularly special from God's point of view. Why are they particularly special from God's point of view? Because they have the potential to relate to God and to resemble God and to embody God more than a bee, more than a plant, more than a worm, more than a dog, more than anything else. Human beings. But everyone is unique because God has within himself so much potential for variety. It expresses itself uniquely. So once you've had, you'll know this, of course, once you've had 2 children, there's no point in having any more, especially if it's a boy or a girl, because you've got it. That's it. You've got a boy, you've got a girl. What else do you need? You don't need anything else. But if you have more, you find, blimey, they're all different. Not just the girls and the boys, but actually the girls are different from the girls. And isn't this extraordinary? Isn't this amazing? If they were all exactly, they plop out and then if they're all exactly the same, feed, change, and then they grow up and they become exactly the same and everything's particular. Unbelievably boring. But it's not like that. It's not like that. Because each one is a very special, unique representation of God. So anyhow, behind lies the common purpose. And everything, all the creation, it's all made like this. But whilst the natural world operates it basically automatically, in human experience it's not automatic. Because we make choices and decisions and have responsibility. How do we relate to each other? We can relate to each other, connected to the common purpose from God in accordance with the way that God intended. So we're not just locks and keys, do you understand? Even if you take the key and you put it in the wrong lock and you force it, you can break the key off in the lock and you can damage it. But much more in the interaction between human beings. We can do incredible damage to one another as well as creating incredible happiness. It has that sort of potential. But what would decide the outcome? It would be decided by the motivation. Is your motivation, because your heart should be directing your emotion, intellect, and will, make your plans, have your ideas, have your intentions, then you put them into action through your body. Is your heart connected to, God's heart? If it is, then when you act, then your action will definitely be for the sake of God and for the sake of the other, and it will make something good. But if it isn't, if it's not aligned correctly, then make something very different, to be very hurtful, very damaging. Because you're not a robot, Okay, how are we doing? Okay, so every being is a subject and has objects. Every being is probably also an object and has its own subjects. In other words, there are many relationships in our lives in which we play different roles. When we're in the subject role, we're initiating. When we're in the object role, we are attracting that attention because actually, we are desirable to the subject. Where, the subject is guiding, the object is responding. The subject is protective, the object is supportive. These describe subjective qualities and objective qualities. And, things are like that. So when you in a sense, we have problems lots of times, don't we? Because we all want to be the subject. Nobody wants to respond. Everybody wants to. It doesn't work, And actually, how do you become better at being a subject? According to the theory, you learn how to be a good object, then you learn how to be a good subject. Something like this. Or the principle says you become a good object in front of God, and then you know how to be a good subject to somebody else. It's very interesting idea. But also, what does it mean? It means, of course, the subject's the important one, the object doesn't matter. That's the way it is, isn't it? Do you think? People would have it down human history in terms of gender difficulties. Men, somehow, made first. The Bible says, took a rib out of Adam and made Eve. So what is it clear, isn't it? Men, superior. Women, made for men. Isn't it like that? No, man, that's nonsense. That's nonsense. Because Father Moon's very clear. Men don't have women. Finish. Finish. Similarly, though, women don't have men. Finish. So, of course, men struggle with women, women struggle with men. Why do we struggle? Because it's a design fault. God mismade us. We don't fit together. It's like the key which will never fit the lock. Is it like that? Principles view is it's not like that. Why is it so difficult to get together? It's because we don't have the proper connection. We don't have the right motivation. We don't obey the right principles. So then we find it very difficult, to get on with one another. This is the problem. So, without the other, you are nothing. You are nothing. You have no value. So what about the conductor then? Of course, I remember the first time I ever heard Father Moon speak. I didn't know him at all then. I just got invited to his talk. And he said, if I was standing here and speaking so passionately as I am now, but there was nobody in the room listening to me, I would be a madman. But if I'm so desperate to express what's in my heart and tell it, and I pick up a speck of dust and I speak to it, I'm no longer mad. Of course, you don't get much more out of a speck of dust than you would out of a worm, right? Probably less. But at least I'm talking to something because I want to talk to something. I've got to talk to something. And this sort of idea. So conductor needs, as a subject, needs an object. And then, of course, the conductor directs the orchestra. And the conductor plays a very significant role because the orchestra has many different musicians, and the conductor provides the connection through which they can then connect with each other. We say it's the vertical connection. So he's conveying this common inspiration, this common mental picture of the whole piece of music, and he's drawing the whole orchestra together so they harmonize and connect together to produce that. So through this, each one's vertical connection to the conductor, it's like God or the purpose. Then actually, of course, through their vertical unity, they're able to make horizontal unity. And then they can make some beautiful, harmonious piece of music. And that's sort of interactions there. So, where the Spirit of God is present, or where the interaction is centered on God, then it becomes harmonious. And the result that comes out, so God has in his mind's eye, springing from his heart, his concept, his idea that springs from his heart, exists prior to the existence of the subject and the object. That's the principle's view. So God had it, God knew what was God decided, God had in his mind's eye what was going to be manifested. And then God directed his energy to manifest it. So when the give and take action occurs according to the intention of God, according to the principles of God, according to the motivation of God, between the subject and the subject and object become one here. Their give and take action with one another, which is a horizontal energy, is absolutely true to that vertical purpose. In other words, it's completely in accordance with the purpose of God and the heart of God. And they unite together, and their unity here moves to here, and it becomes a new creation. The new creation is the perfect harmonization of the subject and object, centering on the purpose. So the idea that God had in his mind's eye becomes substance here. So the responsibility of God to make the plan and put in the energy, added to it this interaction, which in nature is fundamentally automatic, But in human life also is an expression of our responsibility. If it's fulfilled and we unite together in the right way, we realize the world that God intended. We realize the man-woman relationship that God intended, the family that God intended, the society that God intended, the world that God intended. So wherever God's Spirit is present, wherever people are commonly focused on that same heart of love, that same type of motivation, that same spirit of living for the sake of the other, then actually things can come into harmony. So when things are not in harmony, what do you have to check? Why are things not in harmony? It's that other stupid person who's always arguing with me and always fighting with me and always upsetting me. And I have to tell them how bad they are, and that will make it better. Maybe not, maybe it won't make it better. So, where do all the problems arise in the way that empowers you? They arise from myself. So we have to think, how can I do better? So Father Moon's motto, live for the sake of others. This is a very key motto. So look in all the great works of spiritual teaching. What is that love which is based on greed? When there is greed, the love is false. So in other words, if you're relating to someone else to get something, to take something, to exploit them, this is not love. This is not rooted in the love of God. This is not in accordance with God's heart or God's purpose. So God's energy doesn't flow. Something happens between you and the other person, but it's not a base for the energy of God. God's energy doesn't come to it. It has nothing to do with God. Of sacrifice is the sacrifice performed by those who desire no reward is the nature of goodness. So when people do things out of love without looking for anything in return, that is the energy of God. That is the motivation of God. That is in accordance with the heart of God. So then God and that interaction, that they can connect. Do not expect in giving any increase of thyself, of yourself. Whoever seeks to gain his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will preserve it. So when you do things only thinking of others, even at sacrifice to yourself, strangely you will gain a lot. Whilst if you try to do things for your sake in exploitation of others, you will lose everything. That's the principle of life, of the universe. So here's a little word from Father Moon. The desire to benefit yourself is natural. Oh, that's a relief. But if it motivates you to take, it is selfish and wrong. You must understand that to benefit yourself the most, you must give. Give your whole self to others. Then this desire to benefit yourself is good. This simple change will bring a new world order. So truth is not complicated, but it's difficult for us to do. It's difficult to get our heart right, to get our motivation right, and it's difficult to make our relationships work well. Okay, so moving on to another sort of concept within this chain of concepts that is explained here about relationships and how it all works, we have something we call origin, division, union, action. And this is the basic principle of development. So the principle says the ultimate origin is God, and there is a give and take action going on within God, centering on heart, between God's internal character and external form, God's masculinity and femininity as expressions of his internal character and external form. But when God creates divided beings, and then those divided beings are meant to exist for the sake of one another. When they do, they have interaction with one another with the same heart and motivation. So this horizontal energy that's generated here is the direct result of this vertical energy, because they're rooted in the same type of motivation, heart and purpose, and it brings about this result. So origin, division, union. It's a process through which, from a concept within the heart of God, from a vision in the mind of the artist, through an interaction in this way, that vision takes on substantial reality as a creation. This origin, division, union, action is the process in which out of God, the origin, two entities are separately manifested and then reunited in oneness. This is called origin, division, union, action. So when God creates separate subject and object. They live for the sake of each other. Through that, they engage in a common purpose, which is fulfilling God's purpose, and they unite and they make something. Something manifests as a result of that, which didn't exist in a sense before, or was only in the mind of God. And then we move on to another concept, which is a very interesting concept. And this concept underlies the most fundamental explanation of how you make something good in life. This fundamental concept of how you make something good in life, we call it the four-position foundation. This principle here, called the three objects purpose, it's the condition to create a four-position foundation. So it's very abstract, so it's good to make it concrete. But it expresses itself in everything in creation. It's not particular to the example we're going to use. But the example we tend to use is the family, right? Because it's very central to human experience. Because it's, in a sense, almost the highest expression of this, of this origin, division, union, of this three objects purpose and of the four-position foundation. So in the family, God, of course, created the husband. The husband manifests God's masculine nature. Of course, he has within himself a mind and a body, internal character and external form. They should be harmonized. And then the woman, of course, represents the feminine aspect of God. And of course, the woman has also within her mind and a body, internal character, external form. They should be harmonized. And then when they connect with one another, then they become one. And this oneness expresses itself substantially in the child that's born through the seed and the egg that meet, and out of which the child is emerging. But that process, the heart and motivation that lies behind it, is very essential. So this love that comes here, this love should be exactly true to the love of God. This horizontal expression should be absolutely true to the vertical love, that's coming from God. So, of course, we understand in this relationship between God and three other positions, as it were, the husband, the wife, and the children, we understand that God, in the plan of his heart, is caring about this one, and caring about this one, and caring about this one. So the plan is not, let's favor wives. God favors wives, right? He wants wives to be happy. He doesn't care about anybody else. Now, God is interested in everybody's happiness. He designed it so when it's fulfilled correctly, each one will be totally fulfilled. So God is living for the sake of the other three, or God is loving the other three. God as a subject is subject to the husband, subject to the wife, subject to the child. In other words, what does it mean, living for the sake of? Devoted in love too. So, God, we can understand that. So, in other words, God has three object partners to whom God is the subject. He's responsible in love to care about those all three. It's not made to the advantage of one or the other, it's made for the sake of all. And actually, this is not only true of God, but to complete this relationship absolutely, all four positions should live for the sake of the other three. So let's think about it. What this is expressing is, not only should God live for the sake of the husband, the wife, and the children, but the husband should live for the sake of God, for the sake of his wife, and for the sake of his children. And there's an order involved. The principle says you should live for the sake of God first, because if you don't understand God and you don't connect to God, you'll not be able to love your wife. Because you won't know who you are, you won't know who your wife is, and you won't understand in heart how God would like it to be. So you can't love her. And then if you can't love your wife and you have children, what will happen? You can't love your children because you don't love your wife. Can you catch this type of point? So the principle says there's an order in it. But the husband should live for the sake of God, live for the sake of his wife, and live for the sake of the children. Well, that's it, isn't it? That's the end of the story. That's it, finished. Now, God's done his bit and the man's done his bit. It's all done, isn't it? Of course it isn't all done. Because obviously also the wife must be a subject. So, sometimes in our concept in the principle we think, man is masculine, woman is feminine. This means man is subject, woman is object. Do you understand this sort of concept? There's a certain truth in that. Because, for example, physically, man sows the seed, woman has the egg. This is true. But in another sense, clearly, woman is also the subject. In other words, the woman must actively live for the sake of God, and actively live for the sake of the husband, and actively live for the sake of the children, and live for the sake of the husband as an expression of love for God. And love her husband as an expression of the love for the children that are there already or yet to be there. So obviously she has to be the subject too. But how could children be the subject? Surely they can't be the subject because they're the product of the God and the father and the mother, so they can't be the subject. No, to complete the four-position foundation, the principle says the children should be subject too. What does it mean? It means they must actively live for the sake of God. And how would they express actively living for the sake of God? They would express it through their heart towards the father and their mother. Their heart to their father and the mother. Of course, the principle says when you're a little baby or when you're a child, in a sense, your parents are in place of God. But of course, reality is as you grow and develop, particularly in a very muddled, messed up world which we live in today, which is far from ideal, you see all the discrepancies in your parents. So then what do you do? Well, I love God, but my dad is hopeless. What would you do? The guy is just, doesn't work, does it? But what have you got to find? You've got to find the heart that God would wish you to have for your father, even if your father isn't everything he should be, or even your mother isn't everything. Do you understand? And then when that's there, then you're performing your part. Because remember that all the problems are caused by me, and all the solutions are I can make them happen. This is sort of idea. So things are not working correctly. How do you put them right? Well, that's sort of the way you put them right. So isn't it interesting? To really fulfill this relationship, all four positions have to fulfill their three objects' purpose. That's what the principle says. Then you get a four-position foundation. When the origin, the subject partner, and the object partner projected from the origin and their union all fulfill the three objects' purpose, the four-position foundation is established. What does this mean? Those of you who know Father Moon's more internal teachings, you may have heard him speak about three great kingships. He talks about three great kingships. What's he talking about? He's talking about the kingship of grandparents, the kingship of parents, and the kingship of children. So he's talking about three sorts of stages. So in the family, what he's expressing is, of course, we usually show the family God, husband, wife, children, or father, mother, children. But he explains to complete a family, actually the parents should move to this position. When the parents moved to this position, what did they become? They became grandparents. Do you understand? And their children became, or their child, of course, became parent. And then they had their own children. So when three generations of love are manifested, then the family is complete. This type of explanation is there. It's very interesting. So this making the four-position foundation is very, very fundamental to realizing the purpose of heart of God is substantiated through this type of quality of interaction and relationships, centering on Heavenly Father's heart and purpose. So the purpose comes from the Creator. The purpose exists before the creation. So in the mind and heart of God, something existed before it came into substantial being. God put his energy out to allow that to come into being. So therefore, I cannot decide my own purpose of existence. It existed before I was born. So I have to discover my God-given purpose. That's the principle's implication. My purpose for existing came from my Creator God, not from myself. So this is the principle's view that you have to discover about God in order to discover who you are and to know how to lead your life. How are you all doing? We've got a lot to do in the next 15 minutes. Why did God create me? Wow. So we've got lots of clues in what we've already shared about. Basically what we're saying, God created because of heart. Heart is the irrepressible emotional impulse that desires to feel joy through giving love to a partner. So God is a God of love. It means God has to create. Because if God doesn't create, God's got no one to love, no one to give to. So when God creates, he wants to be able to give to a partner that can receive everything. So ultimately, of course, the whole of the universe is the partner of God. But central in the relationship between God and the rest of the universe is actually the human being. So this quality heart is God's essential attribute. It's the core of who God is. So you can never understand God unless you understand this quality. It's the root of God's true love, or the source, if you like, the spring, the well. And it's the core of God's character. And therefore it should be the same for human beings. My heart, which is in accordance with God's heart, resembles God's heart, should be my essential characteristic, the root of my love and the core of my character. So how is joy produced? God is a relational God. God created for joy. Joy is produced when you see your nature reflected in your creation. So it says here, resemblance. Joy arises when we have an object partner in which our internal nature and external form are reflected and developed. Our object partner helps us to feel our own internal nature and external form through the stimulation it gives. Again, this is words of profound inspiration and poetry. No, it's very technical sounding. So what does it mean? Say, you're, let's think, say you're Aung San Suu Kyi, right? What would you want? Would you want to remain the sole hero of Burma's history and no one else would be like you? Would that be your ambition? So you will be the outstanding person and no one else will be like you? No, on the contrary, you would want many people to be like you. Because you'd want to make a good nation. And if you are an exemplary person, you want to have a lot of people like you. So, if you find someone who resembles you, you feel huge confidence in the future. So if you're the world's greatest violinist, right? You want, of course, to be the greatest violinist forever, and you don't want anybody ever to be as good as you. This would not be the nature of God. Father Moon always told this funny story when he was speaking to huge audiences in America. He said, parents are always convinced that their child is beautiful. So if someone comes along to you and says, looks at your child and says, your child is so beautiful, how's that possible? Because you're not, you're not. You would not be offended. That's his claim. He says, even if the child looks like an Idaho potato, still, when the person says your child is beautiful, you feel, more beautiful than you. You feel good about it. So it's a simple way of putting it, but do you understand? So, of course, if you look like a potato and your child looks like a potato, you will feel very happy. Because it's all to do with resemblance. No, but you know what I mean? Once, what are you looking for? If you're an honorable person, what are you looking for in your children? You're worried. Is he going to be responsible? Will he be immature and selfish? Will he just carelessly do all the things he likes for himself and forget about his responsibilities? When we'll be so disappointed. Or will he grow into someone we start to think, wow, God, Manny, you're showing this incredible heart of responsibility and care for other people. Wow. That is just so extraordinary. We are so wonderful to see. Of course, in my life, I wasn't always like that, but in my better moments, and now I see my better moments manifested in you. This is just incredible. This is just wonderful. So that is the nature of, how is joy produced? It's through the relationship with the object partner, when the object partner resembles you and manifests your internal nature and internal character and external form. So here we go. The potter and the clay, right? So my purpose for being created is to bring joy to God. And this is quite technical also, but it has a lot of depth to it. So what's that partner? What's that object that the subject is looking for because you want to give love? It resembles you. It's your object that resembles you. And it's the substantiation of all the goodness that's in your heart, which is invisibly within you, but which has come now into substantial reality through your creation. And it's matured, it's perfected, it's completed, and it's the object of your heart. So anyhow, you can capture how significant that is, and you can capture how important that is for anybody whose ambition is to create something with their life, be it their children, be it their career, be it whatever it is. You want it to, fulfill your hopes and dreams, and at the core of your hopes and dreams are also the hopes and dreams of God if you're living in a true way. So we say, if you were to try to summarize the gift that God wants to give in love to human beings, you could summarize it in 3 gifts. And we call these 3 gifts the 3 blessings, and it's a reference to a certain verse in Genesis chapter 1. And this verse is said in the Bible from God to Adam and Eve. And God says to Adam and Eve, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and have dominion over all the things in the world. So the principle says this is the 3 major tasks of life. And it relates to, not surprisingly, 3 goals, but we have to make 3 ways in which the heart and love of God and the plan of God becomes substance. So we have to make 3, what would we make? 3 4-position foundations, which are to do with completing the 3 objects' purpose. So here we go. First blessing is to do with perfecting my personality as an individual, becoming a person of true love. How do you become a person of true love? Well, you can become it by generating energy for your own development. How do you generate energy for your own development? It's through the give and take action between your mind and body. You need give and take action to create the energy which causes development. This give and take action between your mind and body is a horizontal energy. It's manifested in your life. But where should it originate from? It should originate from God's plan for you, God's vision of what He wants you to become, His love for you, which is expressed through that vision, which motivates it, and your love for God. So your love for God, in response to God's love for you, motivates you to live the way you do in daily life and have this right give and take action between your mind and body. And that makes you into this person. So here's the vertical energy, if you like, the love of God. Here's your response in daily life, living your life, practicing loving God and living for the sake of other people. And as you generate that energy, so you make yourself. So in a sense, it goes like this. The love of God comes to the mind, which is the subject, and your mind is objective to God. In other words, you receive the love of God in your mind, you love God back, and then as a result of that, you want to act. You want to put it into action. That's the nature of love. If you feel loved by somebody else, and you feel you want to love them, how does it, of course you just stand there. Don't you? Mm-hmm. No. So, if you want to express it, then you find a way to express it. So physical expression, you give them a hug, you give them a kiss, you give them an embrace, you say some encouraging words, you give them a pat on the back, the appropriate way for the appropriate person. You find some way to manifest it, words of praise, actions of affection, whatever it is. Because, it goes from God to the mind, because the mind is in a position to relate to God and to mediate, because the body is in a sense more distant from God. The mind connects to the mind of God, and then it should be subject over the body. So object to God, having been a good object to God, becomes a subject qualified to direct the body. In other words, you need to develop your mind to be a good mind. So how do you develop your mind to be a good mind? You study the scripture, you pray, you work out, what's righteous, you try to deeply understand, which is not just an intellectual exercise. It's a very profound exercise. And then, you develop your mind, then your mind directs your body, and then your mind and body interact. It means you perform good actions, and then you grow yourself as a result of that. That's the way it works. So the key to God's first blessing is the perfection of individual character. For this, one should form a God-centered individual 4-position foundation, whereby mind and body become one. So the ideal person, then, is a person who doesn't have a contradiction. It means their true mind, their godly mind, their original mind, manifests itself continuously in their action. So their words and their deeds become one. A person of integrity. That person is effectively a substantial manifestation of God. So God doesn't have a mouth. God doesn't have hands. God wants to give someone a hug. God cannot give someone a hug. But God can use someone to give the hug on God's behalf. Do you understand? It can be passing that. God has something He wants to say, but doesn't have a way to say it. So find someone to say it through. So such a person becomes, the Word incarnate, becomes the manifestation of God. The principles no longer remain as abstract principles of living for the sake of others. They become a substantial manifestation in the life of the person. So this is the first blessing. So again, some biblical quotations. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. You yourself are God's temple and God's Spirit lives in you. Love God with all your heart, soul and mind. These are biblical scriptural quotations. You can find very similar things in other scriptures, of course. Second blessing. So that first one, right, that's to do with mind and body, right? That's internal character, external form, bringing them together correctly. Second blessing is to do with man and woman, masculine and feminine, bringing them together. Within God, masculine and feminine, subject and object, they're harmonized. But God, when God creates, He creates separate masculine being, separate feminine being. then they should become one. How can they become one? Well, there's a precondition, and that is basically that this man's mind and body should become one. In other words, this is a person of integrity. This is a person who can keep his word. This is a person who says, when he says, I love you, he means it, and he can live according to it. And similarly with this person. She also, when she says, I love you, she's able to carry it out. She's able to make it substance. And it becomes substance in their relationship with one another, which grows over time. And this love they have for one another, that's exactly how God intended it to be. That's exactly how God, envisaged it. That when he made men, he wanted the man to be that sort of person. He wanted him to love the woman in that sort of way. And then it becomes substantial reality. But every time it happens, it's unique. Because no man's the same as no other man. No woman's the same as any other woman. So each time it's unique. So the second blessing is fulfilled when the man and the woman construct a God-centered family four-position foundation by joining in loving oneness as husband and wife and raising their children. Wow. So, family then. This is just a statement from a sociologist, a very famous sociologist, but fundamentally she expresses that family is at the core of, down in all cultures, in all time, family is at the center of those cultures. Why? Because men and women need to get together, of course, in order to have children, in order to multiply. Look in the scriptures. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man put asunder. This is read, of course, at the marriage ceremony in Christian marriages. And among his signs is this, that he created for you mates from among yourselves, that you may dwell in tranquility with them. And he has put love and mercy between your hearts. Verily in that are signs for those who reflect. So here it is then, and there's a sort of amazing circuit of love, or development of love, that exists in the family, and Father Moon calls it the four great loves. The Divine Principle calls it the four great loves. And this is not explained so much inside the Divine Principle book. This was explained more in his more extensively in his subsequent teachings. And he explains how love grows, and he explains within the nature of God, there resides invisibly parents' love, conjugal love or spouses' love, husband and wife love, siblings' love, brothers and sisters' love, and children's love. But it's all within the nature of God. And so long as it remains only within the nature of God, God can't taste it. But when God created man and woman to make families, and then when in that families these loves become substantiated in the relationship between parents and children, brothers and sisters, husbands and wives, God sees the resemblance of his love substantiated. And it is unbelievably beautiful to God. It is just amazingly delightful to God, because it's resembling something within his own nature which he can't taste, touch, see, experience. So, how delightful is it to see your children have their own children, your children love their children. How delightful is it to see your elder daughter looking after your younger son, or whatever it is. How delightful it is. But there's a certain process through which love develops. So basically this is how it should work. The love of God should come down to this place. Why to this place? Because this is the place that man and woman meet in love. So this meeting of love between man and woman, this should be the type of meeting that's entirely attracting, as it were, or drawing, or the perfect object to the subject, which is the love of God. In other words, the love of God can find its container here. Father Moon sometimes said it is like a container. The husband and wife have to make a container that's big enough to contain the love of God. So if you've got a little cup, tiny little glass or a little egg cup, and you turn the bath tap on full, and you put the egg cup underneath, and you take it away, how much water you got in the egg cup? Nothing. But if you put the plug in the bath and turn the tap on, fills. So, to contain the love of God, you need to make a big container, right? A good container. But if you can contain it, and if you can bring the love of God down to this place, and your love, how much God loves you and how much you love God is expanded hugely by discovering how much God loves you through your wife and through your husband, which are the best gift of God to you. If you can make that discovery, you can make such a big container, you can pour the love of God down to the next generation. So parents' love comes to children. Parents' love comes to children, and parental love is the cause, and children's love is the response. So children love their parents back because they are loved. That's why you need that protective, love of the parents to give you the sense of security, not just being physically cared for, but the sense of being loved. And that becomes the core of your identity. And then you respond to your parents. And then as you grow up, what happens next? The next stage of love is that you discover your brothers and sisters are around you. You get brothers and sisters. And then because you love your parents, which is the cause, in a sense, you feel some heart to look after your brothers and your sisters. The more you feel loved by your parents, in all probability, the more you will feel to love the others. And the less likely there is to be sibling rivalry. Anyhow, there's always growing pains in every circumstance. But fundamentally, it's like that. If you feel loved, so then child's love comes back to parents. That's this one here, the son's love and the daughter's love, because, masculine and feminine, it's different. But everybody's also unique. Then that develops into sibling love, brother's love and sister's love. And these two loves together, this is the son's love or heart, this is the brother's heart. Over here, right, this is the daughter's heart, and this is the sister's heart. So they become the preparation, the practice of loving. The root of love is that you receive the love of God through your parents' love for you, and you feel connected to the love of God. And then that manifests in your love for your brothers and sisters, the love for your parents, and then love for your brothers and sisters. And those two loves, they become the core around, on the basis of which you then develop your love for your husband or your wife. It's rooted in. So Father Moon even expresses how much you love your dad. Well, will of course be affected by how much you felt your dad loved you, or how much you perceived your dad loved you, or how much you perceived God behind your dad loved you. This will affect the quality of your relationship with your husband. Similarly, your mother, your wife, and so on. And then it's brothers and sisters, same sort of things are involved in that. So each one is building to the other one. So the foundation for this relationship is for husband and wife, conjugal relationship is brothers and sisters love and sons and daughters love. And then, of course, from this conjugal love comes the opportunity to experience parental love, which is the most complete expression of the love of God. But having said that, although parental love is the most complete expression, the most critical love is this one. It's the spouse's love or the conjugal love. Because if men and women don't come together in the right way, then the love of God can't come down and can't pass to the next generation. So the principle explains very clearly how men and women meet in love. This will decide everything. It will decide whether the cycle of love can continue or not. Because it'll decide on the quality of, how much the love of God can come down and pass to the next generation. So, this is very profound explanation, and I'm 5 minutes over my time already. But here we go. This is from the love of God, which is the red dot in the middle, passing to the children through the parents comes children's love, it's the blue one. Then sibling love, it's the white one. Then conjugal love, it's the sort of light mauve one, and then the blue one on the outside, that's parental love. So they're all interconnected and rooted ultimately in the love of God. They're manifestations of the love of God. So anyhow, I better stop, I think. I'll just do this one, and I'll finish with this one. Very interesting thought, this. And again, this is not in the Divine Principle book. But Father Moon expresses, to know who I am, to be confirmed in my identity and my value, I need to know my origin. I was a social worker for a number of years, and I worked with children who'd been removed from their own families and placed in other people's families because something was happening in their own families to do with usually sexual abuse or to do with physical abuse, emotional abuse, so they were taken out. So in one way it was a great relief to be taken out because they weren't at the mercy of very unreliable parents anymore. But in another way it wasn't good at all because they were separated from their origin. And they, so it's a very, very painful and difficult situation. So, what is my origin? My origin is the meeting of love between my father and my mother. How is that manifested substantially? It's manifested substantially, the sperm meets the egg. But of course this is the external expression, but there should be some internal cause. What is this should be the love of the man for the woman and the love of the woman for the man. What causes that? What causes your love for your wife, it's its true love, is your love for God. What causes your love for your husband is your love of God. Because you don't know your wife or your husband fully yet, so why should you love them? You have a precondition to love them because you love God. And because you know God wants you to love them. And because you know it's a gift from God. And then you manifest it, you substantiate it, you develop it. So the meeting of the sperm and egg in the love between the man and because it's an external expression of an internal love. What is this? The principle explains that meeting is a meeting, but the invisible cause is Heavenly Father's love and plan of love. Because of Heavenly Father's love and plan of love, the sperm and the egg are meeting one another. So you are not just born from the sperm of your dad and the egg of your mum. You're born of the love of God, which designed them, created them, and purposed them to meet in love. So how men and women meet in love, this is profoundly significant to what comes out as a result of it. Profoundly significant. So there's another blessing which we'll do in the next lecture. Thanks.